Hi folks, so I don't always feel compelled to do sort of a new moon video follow-up, but this time I did because there were certain things I wanted to do and say and address. When I did my new moon in Aquarius video a couple of days ago, and we had the new moon in Aquarius yesterday, February the 9th, yesterday afternoon, I mentioned that that two of the that there were two transits that were encoded into the new moon, and therefore in the Aquarius month, in the 28 days following the new moon. So while we've got the lunar month of Aquarius underway with the new moon in Aquarius through to the new moon in Pisces on March the 10th. So February 9th to March the 10th, let's call that, as an astrologer, more and more, I think of months as really being lunar. And as I've mentioned, that's where the word is derived from, month, moon. And I think in terms of sort of the month of Capricorn and the month of Aquarius. And for me, the month starts when there's a new moon and ends, when the next new moon occurs, whether sometimes it is in the same sign, rarely, but sometimes, but typically it moves on to the next sign. And so I tend to think of it that way. The more I function and work as an astrologer, and the more I follow the planets for my own sort of day-to-day guidance and enjoyment and entertainment purposes, if you like, the more sort of the standard calendar that we follow on a day-to-day basis are just dates and markers, and they're fine. They perform a function. I don't mean to turn this into a railing against things kind of video, but when we look at a new moon, not only do we look at aspects that new moon might be making, and as I mentioned from my perspective, the new moon is unaspected, and something I addressed in the last video. So I understand that for some astrologers, the new moon is square Uranus. I addressed that in the new moon video I did. I'm not gonna waste your time and repeat that here. You're welcome to look at that new moon video in Aquarius. That is the new moon in Aquarius video that I did. But we also look at other aspects that are occurring at that time, that are encoded into that time. If you think of the new moon time as the start of something, when we as astrologers look at what the quality or the nature of the time is going to be at the start of a period, we look at that marker, we look at that time, in this case the new moon, we see what is going on around it, and we feel, rightly or wrongly, and it's up to each of us to experiment with how much this works for us or not. And I would encourage you to do so and to maintain a kind of a healthy and skeptical perspective on astrology and all sorts of things. Healthily skeptical. Always test to see if it's working for you or not working for you. But it's certainly what I do, even though I practice and consult with people. And quite frankly, it's through that practice that I gain greater security in terms of what it is I'm actually seeing or not seeing, as opposed to kind of completely going into fantasy land with transits and planets and sort of getting overcome by mystical archetypes, or overcome by some of the jargon of the language or some of the content that I come across. But coming back to this particular video, there were two transits that were occurring that I felt were encoded into this new moon. Mercury in Aquarius squaring Jupiter in Taurus, and Mars and Pluto getting ready to conjunct in Aquarius. And with the Mercury square Jupiter, I'm gonna talk about these two transits in a little bit more detail as a reminder, but with the Mars Venus conjuncting Pluto over the next week, I'm going to talk a little bit more in greater detail. But there was one transit that I missed. That's really why I'm doing this video, which was that there was a third aspect, two transiting planets, and I know they're not planets, but I'm going to call them planets for our purposes. Bodies, astrological entities, astronomical entities, no, astrological entities, you'll know what I mean if we want to get more and more precise, that are conjuncting, that should also be considered part of this new moon, and that is that the North Node and Chiron conjunct in Aries on, let me give you that date, February 19th, I believe. Am I right or am I wrong? I am right. North Node conjuncts Chiron in Aries on February the 19th, and that one I missed. Now, there are 5 things I want to cover in this moon. The North Node Chiron conjunction, which I did not cover in the last video. That's really why I'm doing this video. I thought, oh crap, there's a third one. But then I also want to talk about a little bit about, just as a reminder, the Mercury-Jupiter square, but Mercury's role over the next week. It's just a friendly reminder. I want to talk about the Mars and Pluto conjunction that is coming up, followed very soon with the Venus-Pluto conjunction. I want to talk about where we're at with the new moon, a day after the new moon. And I want to talk about, this is the 5th thing, and I'm going to start with this. Someone asked me this question about, as I said, if you want to listen to a new moon in Aquarius video, listen to my last video. That really is meant to be the new moon in Aquarius video. If you want an overview of all the transits that are going to be occurring through the sign of Aquarius and what they're trying to set up to be and do, look at the video prior to that. You can look at whichever videos and watch them and give yourself a time limit by all means. I'm a big advocate in not spending your days looking at YouTube videos. Even though it might mean for someone like me that there are more clicks and more this or more that. Be in action. Something I tell myself, something I encourage you to be, because then, you know, we're actually doing what we're here to do. And I don't mean being meaningless action and don't know when to let go and all that kind of, those are all important principles as well. Someone asked the question. So the first of the 5 things that I want to talk about is, someone said in the comments that this was a void of course new moon, a void new moon. And what did that mean? Or how did, they didn't quite ask that, but it felt like it was logically reaching to this thing of, well, does that affect the new moon in any way, in and of itself? When you have a new moon, first and foremost, what is a void of course moon? A void, of course, the moon takes about 2.5 days to go through every sign. As it goes through every sign, the moon is going to likely make certain aspects. So the moon, as it went through Aquarius, before we had the new moon, the moon squared Jupiter, trined the south node, squared Uranus, and then we had, it also, not to forget, soon after it entered Aquarius, it conjuncted Pluto. So the moon made all these aspects, and then we had the new moon, it conjuncted the sun. And then after that, in the general chart, the moon, while it is in Aquarius, makes no more aspects, and therefore it is considered a void of course moon. And when we're looking at a void of course moon, current sort of what I will call regular astrological advice is don't start anything. Anything that'll be done will not have energy behind it. It will be kind of dead. You know, it's a little bit like we say don't start anything right before a new moon. The moon is small. It doesn't have energy behind it or impetus behind it. Let me just give you my perspective, because that's why you asked me the question. A new moon is never void, because the new moon by definition is the moon conjuncting the sun. After the new moon, especially if a new moon is happening like it is right now, or it has been for the past few months, in the last 10 degrees of every sign, this new moon I think occurred at about 20 or 21 degrees of Aquarius, there's a chance or a possibility that the new moon is going to be void of, that the moon, after it is new, is going to be void of course for the remainder of the time that it is still in the same sign. Because we're just talking about, we're talking about only a third of the sign left to transit. In addition, we're just talking about the general chart. The new moon and the moon after it becomes new, even if it is not going to aspect any of the planets transiting in the heavens right now, it may still aspect a planet in your natal chart or your birth chart. I have Mercury at about 28 degrees. I have Uranus and Mars at around 26 degrees. I have my North Node at about 28, 29 degrees. I have Venus at 29 degrees. So when I have a new moon occurring in the last 10 degrees of a sign, it's possible that it could occur in a sign that does not make any strong aspects to any of these points. But when I look at the new moon in Aquarius, I know that it is going to square my Mercury in Scorpio at the very least. So even though it is a void, so the new moon occurs, while the moon goes through the next 10 degrees, it is, and this is true of the new moon in Aquarius, it was not going to be making any aspects to any of the planets currently circulating around the heavens. But the moon, in its nascent state, may still be aspecting a planet in your natal chart. And if it does so, then again, there are astrologers who believe that it is not completely void of course, that it still has a certain energy, still going to meet up with someone, with another entity. So you've got that to consider. A moon may be void of course after it is new, but I consider the thing that gives me a greater sense of the quality of the new moon, and whether the new moon is going to be active or relatively passive, whether it is going to bring results quickly or slowly, I find that the rulership of the new moon, in this case, Saturn and Uranus, because those are the two planets that rule Aquarius, that the rulership of the rulership of the new moon plays more of a role in giving us a sense of the quality, speed, pace of what manifestation during that new moon cycle will look like than anything other than the aspects that are being made around the time of that new moon. It's part of the reason in my new moon videos I talk about the ownerships, and I even go so far as to talk about the dispositorships, although I think that's starting to become a little bit nutty. When we had the new moon in Virgo in the middle of October, just as Mercury was still stationary. Mercury went direct, I think, the day after the new moon in Virgo, which was in September, forgive me, not October, the middle of September of 2023. I said, and my experience was, that from the middle of September then till the middle of October, till the Libra new moon, it's not as if there weren't new beginnings or events that occurred that tied to, I experienced the new moon in the Virgo part of the chart, the house occupied by Virgo and what it stood for. But the actual, but details related to whatever it was that came through during that time had a kind of protracted and delayed quality. So for me specifically, there was a job that I booked, and I booked it while Mercury was retrograde. After when Mercury went direct, the details and the nature of that job changed in a way that was a little bit stressful, because you're expecting to go into something, and I'm talking about an acting job, so it wasn't like a long-term job, but there were certain details about it. Then I did the job after Mercury went direct, even though I had booked it while Mercury was retrograde with certain details there. As it often happens, if you commit to something during Mercury retrograde, once Mercury goes direct, everyone starts to look at it in a slightly different way and adjust things. And so, of course, the nature of the thing changes, which causes stress for people because you're expecting something and something else happens. But also, for me, Virgo sits in my second house of income. The whole sort of payment process of that only started to come in and take shape as Mercury started to move forward more and more, and as we moved into the new moon cycles following that. So it isn't as if it didn't show up, but what was going on with the ruling planet for the new moon in Virgo affected the quality and nature of what that new moon was trying to bring. With new moons, I will say that for some people, often within 24 to 48 hours after a new moon occurs, you start to see things related to where the new moon is occurring show up. Certainly in about a week's time. In 2 weeks, where's Aquarius in your chart? Not only do you have to take action in it, the beauty of the new moon cycle and the month is that actions taken prior to the new moon and after the new moon, there's a greater chance of results coming in. And the result doesn't have to be, here's the Nobel Peace Prize, or here's the Nobel Prize for Literature. The result could be, I send out something and I get a response, and from there we can go somewhere. It's either a yes or a no, and if it's a yes, then it might be a meeting. It's a development. It's something that it's things sprouting from the ground. It's mushrooming, green shoots finally coming up in the Aquarius part of the chart. when we were talking about the new moon Aquarius. So the fact that the moon was void of course after it was new really only affects the fact that the moon was in Aquarius for just about a day or so after the new moon occurred. And it may be that for that day after the new moon, not much happened and you weren't able to get to it very much. And, the moon is still small. It is still a crescent. For me, there's always a shift of energy after a new moon occurs. And I covered this in my last video, and I've covered this before. 48 hours, 72 hours, as we get to 24 hours, as we get to the new moon, the energy becomes more and more and more and more depressed, more and more flat, harder to get things done, easy to be depleted, wanting to take a nap. And then the new moon occurs, and I feel the nature. There are three things for me on a day-to-day basis that continue to keep me engaged with astrology as a practice and as a profession for myself. There are three things that occur on a day-to-day basis that I cannot ignore, that whenever I think this is absolutely bananas, that we are looking at these planets in the sky and ascribing meaning to them. When I go into what I consider a healthy skeptical mode, why am I doing this? Does this make sense? Am I making this up? Am I seeing this? Am I not seeing this? But I saw this in this chart, and I saw this in this chart, but I said this, and this happened, and so-and-so said that this was correct, and so-and-so came back 2 years later and said, what you told me was, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. And I'm just like, is this all just something? I think it's healthy because you're not dealing with your five senses to just kind of go, can I stand behind this? And those three things are, number one, Mercury retrograde. Can't keep making it, like, things happen that are mundane, but things happen otherwise that you can't ascribe to something else. And of course, as my practice has deepened, I'm even clearer about what a Mercury retrograde is about. And when it happens, I tell you. Number two, the energy around new moons and full moons and the lunar months. They're so clear to me. They're so palpable. I'm just like, I'm not making this up. As we get to a full moon and the energies become jangly and they're melted, I'm just like, I can't keep making this up. Full moon after full moon after full moon. And the third thing is a little bit more esoteric, and that is where the moon is in my lunar return. So a lunar return is a chart that you create when the moon conjuncts your natal moon. Depending on the location you're in, you can take a snapshot of that chart, and it gives you a sense of what that next lunar month is going to be like. And two things will tell you, I find, what the quality of my days are going to be on a day-to-day basis. Number one, where's the moon in my natal chart? Number two, where's the moon in my lunar return chart? And you guys, you want to try doing it, but for me, and I use whole signs, W-H-O-L-E, I use whole signs when I do this. And I am consistently blown away by where my days are going, where my energy is going, what is manifesting based on where those two parts of the chart that the moon are in. It's just constantly amazing to me. I'm just like, so coming back to the void of course moon, a new moon is not void of course. A new moon is an aspect, the sun and the moon conjunct. In Aquarius, they're starting up what I will call the month in Aquarius. From a new moon in Aquarius to the next new moon in Pisces. As I discussed in the new moon video, the sun has already made significant aspects, all the significant aspects it was going to make to the transiting planets in the sky before the new moon occurred. The moon did the same thing. So both the sun and the moon have taken stock of what is needed in the sign of Aquarius, and they became new, and they conjuncted, and now for the next month, it is up to us to make things happen. The fact that the moon was void of course for about a day after the new moon occurred in Aquarius may mean that things were, that, we're just past, actually it's not even a full day because the moon entered Pisces 3/4 of a day or something along those lines. The new moon was 2:59 p.m. yesterday. I'm recording this at 4:43 p.m., soon to be 4:44 p.m., 4:44 in a second, in a minute. I'm recording this at that time. And the moon entered Pisces this morning for me. So for 3/4 of a day, we had a void of course moon, which means that you may not have been able to achieve a whole lot or do a whole lot or push a whole lot or got something done, or maybe if something was done during that time, it may be that it doesn't really flower necessarily quite as fast or quite as strongly, but it's 4:44. But at the same time, if the moon was still going to aspect some point in your natal chart, it isn't void, of course, from a personal perspective for you. What is more significant as far as the new moon is concerned is the quality of what the ruling planets are up to, what Saturn is up to in Pisces, and what Uranus is up to in Taurus. And Uranus is playing a big role with this new moon because the new moon occurred right after the sun and the moon squared Uranus. We covered this in the new moon in Aquarius video. The personal planets transiting through Aquarius square both Jupiter and Uranus and Taurus. Action needs to be taken in the Aquarius part of the chart to allow Jupiter to end and start a 12-13 year cycle in the sign of Taurus, and for Uranus to make you more authentic and individual, more what is right for you, what is the right path for you in the Taurus part of the chart. And when I say the Aquarius part of the chart and the Taurus part of the chart, I mean the houses occupied by these signs and what those houses stand for. And that's all I'm going to say on this right now, because I talked about it at length in the last 2 videos. So I wanted to cover this thing about the void of course moon because I think it's an interesting information that we all should have and consider. And the fact that the dispositor, all the planets, as I said, are in Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, and Taurus. So naturally, when we look at the dispositors, they're largely going to be, one of the dispositors of the chart is Neptune and Pisces. I was amused and interested to see that the dispositor of the chart are kind of, you have Neptune as one sole dispositor, and you've also got Saturn and Jupiter and Uranus and Venus kind of doing this kind of ricochet because they're sort of in mutual, they're in houses occupied by, Jupiter and Uranus are in a house occupied by Venus. Venus is in a house occupied by Saturn. Saturn is a house that is occupied by Jupiter and Neptune. Jupiter is in a house that is occupied by Venus. And so you have this kind of trio of Saturn in Pisces, Jupiter and Uranus in Taurus, and Venus in Capricorn that are dispositive. What I was amused to see was that so much when we look at the new moon and the transiting planets through Aquarius, our attention naturally is to the fact that they are aspecting Jupiter and Uranus in Taurus and the South Node in Libra. But when we look at the dispositorship, there's something about the action that we're taking in the Aquarius part of the chart, even though, as I've said to you, the Aquarius part of the chart is not the one that's going to be simmering for the rest of the year, unlike Capricorn, unlike Pisces. Aries for the first half of this year. Actually, Aries even till the middle of 2025. We've still got an eclipse on the Aries-Libra axis. Taurus for the first half of the, it's. I think most of all, I was amused and interested to see that their actions related to the Aquarius part of the chart, that while they may directly impact and are needed to unlock and to support Jupiter and Uranus and Taurus and the South Node in Libra, there's something about these actions and activities that are necessary to the overall health of the Pisces part of the chart. And the Venus in Capricorn dispositorship makes me think that we've actually been in some form of action related to the Aquarius part of the chart, even since Venus entered Capricorn. I think it was like January 23rd or thereabouts. Would not surprise me at all. Now, I'm starting to become really extensive, and I'm a firm believer that when it comes to astrological consultation, I don't think we were put on this planet to spin around in circles doing every single permutation and combination. I think that insofar as there's something to this, it's meant to guide us. And I don't think that the information, the knowledge is meant to be so complicated that we're supposed to go bananas trying to figure out what is happening and what it all means. And that is why I try to keep my videos and my information. I kind of follow the 80-20 rule, which is let me get you the bulk of the information and it will cover what I really believe we need to know. But the rulership of this particular new moon is relatively active. And I don't care if it is active or not active by anyone's definition. Everything else astrologically is demanding action, which is why I titled my new moon in Aquarius video Urgency. It is time to get moving and take action in the Aquarius part of the chart, especially over the next 10 odd days, so that 2024 can really get off to a rollicking start with regard to us moving forward, feeling like we're moving forward and achieving what we need to achieve. As I've warned you, as you get towards February 20th onwards, the planets will start to move towards Saturn and into Pisces, and that will bring a different weight to our day-to-day experiences. Okay, now, related to that, that's point number 1 of 5 that I wanted to cover. Related to that, I want to cover when a new moon occurs, and we have the moon void, of course, for about 3/4 of a day. And then after that, we have the moon still in crescent form, but there's a sense of urgency to get things done over the next 10 days, which doesn't quite take us to the full moon. How do we manage the fact that with a slender moon, we feel the wind behind us, we feel the need, we feel the action, the quality changes, but we still may, for about 48 to 72 hours after the new moon, be feeling a little bit like, it's hard to get going. The answer, my friends, is prioritization. You cannot expect yourself to be operating with the same intensity right after a new moon as you would expect to be operating around a full moon. Now, a lot of this depends on whether new moons and full moons are occurring in your birth chart. If it's happening in the 12th house, either of them, the new moon and the full moon, is a very different quality than if it's happening in the 6th house. The 6th house is the busiest part of the chart. The 12th house is the least busy part of the chart. Ultimately, on that axis, you're still dealing with issues related to health and rest and self-care, but also action and activities and serving yourself and serving others. It's still the work-rest yin and yang axis in all our charts, but the quality or the nature, but you cannot expect yourself to have the same energy, motivation, emotional ability, and our emotional life is more important than just about anything. One of the reasons why astrologically we feel like Mondays are hard is because the Monday is ruled by the moon. One of the reasons why we feel like we're ready to go on Tuesdays because Tuesday is ruled by Mars. Often we're communicating more on Wednesday because Wednesday is ruled by Mercury. Thursdays have a more expansive feel ruled by Jupiter. By the time Friday occurs, we feel like it is time to kick up our heels and reach for your beverage of choice, ruled by Venus. Saturday technically and typically should be a day of taking care of chores and responsibilities. Now it depends on where Saturn sits in your birth chart. For me, it sits in the 12th house, so I have a real struggle with balancing Saturday as a day for rest as opposed to a day for action. Sunday, what do you want me to say about Sundays? So when we're talking about the moon, we're really talking about our emotional capacity to get things done. And when the moon is new and growing, that energy is harder to access. And so the answer to how to take action when the theme is urgency is prioritization. The things that you know you need to get to, try to prioritize them in the day, whatever that works for you. If you work better in the mornings, in the afternoons, the evenings, in the nighttime, try to prioritize them so you do them when the energy is there. As the moon grows, you will likely find as the moon grows, you will likely find that your capacity to sustain yourself during the course of the days is greater. By the time you get to the full moon, not unusual for people to stay up late, have trouble sleeping around a full moon, because your energetic cup is just so full. But the next 10 days count. So what becomes important is to understand, when are you most productive? And what is it that absolutely you really want to try and prioritize and get done related to the Aquarius part of the chart, the house occupied by Aquarius, and to get yourself to take action on that, because it may be that the 2 or 3 or 4 days following a new moon, your most productive energy is for 3 or 4 hours in a day, 5 hours in a day, 6 hours in a day, increasingly, if that. But the wind is still behind your sails. And so I wanted to address this because with the crescent growing, we've talked about prioritization and urgency. We've talked about urgency and getting things done, but it's likely that in some very important and critical days, over the next 3 or 4 days, it might be hard to find the energy to take care of what needs to get done. And so my recommended solution is prioritize accordingly. If there are chores or things that can be done when the energy is less and you need to take care of the house occupied by Aquarius related activities in your chart more urgently, try and see if you can get to a point. A lot is going to depend on where the moon is in your birth chart, and where it is in your lunar return, because you may have to deal with or contend with issues related to those parts of the chart on a day. But see if you can draw some boundaries around your time and prioritize where the action needs to be taken. And understand that for the first 3, 4, 5, 6 days after a new moon, you are working with limited reserves. And so you want to put that prioritization, assign those tasks to when you're likely to be most productive. Now, the 3 transits related to this new moon, 2 of which we've already discussed and talked about, but I'm going to expand on. The third thing I wanted to talk about is the first of these transits, Mercury square Jupiter. Very briefly, Mercury squaring Jupiter. Over the next 7-8 days, it will trine the south node and square Uranus. Mercury is already conjuncted Pluto on February the 5th. It's squaring Jupiter today. And if you want this information, it trines the south node and squares Uranus on the 16th, in 6 days' time. This next week, as I mentioned in my New Moon Aquarius video, Mercury plays an important role. It may very well be that when it comes to activities and actions related to the Aquarius side of the house, that they involve Mercury-related activities. Communication, sending emails, receiving emails, setting up phone calls, commuting, transportation, travel perhaps, transactions, technology, social media, skill acquisition, TED Talks, I don't know, resumes, sales, chatter, gossip, hopefully in a healthy way, colleagues, networks, all that kind of stuff, okay? That's 3 things done. Void of course moon, growing crescent, Mercury taking the lead. All right, let's go to 4 and 5. I want to talk about the North Node and Chiron conjuncting first. In the last video, I talked about 2 planets. I know they're not planets, don't come after me. 2 astrological entities. When they conjunct, I've encouraged you to think of them as though they're sitting down to a cup of tea together. The North Node is our calling. The North Node is the knock on our heart. The North Node is unavoidable if you want to lead a fulfilled life. And if, especially in the second half of life, after the ages of 38 to 44, you really want to feel fulfilled, I find aligning with the North Node becomes really important, both in terms of the quality of what we do and how we do it. It is the yearning, it is the desire, it is the set of behaviors that we are here to strengthen, learn, lean into. And it is in the doing and in the and it feels very much when we follow the North Node, because we are not strong or skilled in North Node related behaviors, activities. It feels like we're walking a tightrope that we really want to walk, and we don't know if the rope will continue to appear under our feet, and yet it does. But it has that precarious quality. With the North Node, I hasten to add, you've got to be very clear about what your needs for security are, because the North Node and following your hero's journey can do a real number on following your sense of purpose. Has a sense of adventure to it that not all of us have. We all have to determine how we're going to use those qualities that we're innately strong in with our South Node, but don't serve us anymore, and kind of are like an overripe fruit, almost to some extent, with the South Node, but come naturally to us, and sometimes we can make money at. Now, it's not likely to be the kind of money that you can really make when you follow your North Node in a consistent manner, but you've got to find the balance when you follow your North Node, and you're going to have to, with regard to how you do it so that your needs are being met and your security and your luxury needs are being met, because following the North Node can just kind of take you all over the place and can do a real number on your security. So, but it is unavoidable. So you've got to, it's a little bit like when people say that they're going to follow their bliss or follow the knock on their heart, or very often this means not leading. It's very interesting. With the North Node, a lot of the qualities assigned to the North Node traditionally are now assigned to Neptune and Uranus. Neptune, because Neptune's fogginess. In a lot of traditional practices, the North Node is a malefic. It deludes you. It makes you hungry. It makes you desirous. It's like the unquenchable, thirsty demon. And so in its kind of delusional, desiring aspect, it leads you into kind of a delusional life, and it loosens your connection to material security, and that's its great danger. And in modern Western astrology, a lot of those qualities have now been given over to Neptune, but it behooves us to remember this aspect of the North Node. When it comes to Uranus, we're talking about those things that intuitively and authentically feel totally right to us. Our individual epiphany, inner knowing, this is the right thing. Doesn't matter what conventional wisdom says. And that aspect of the North Node has been given over now to Uranus. And the North Node has become this calling. It behooves us to remember both those. But there are certain astrologers, and I am one of them, who continue to believe that the North Node is the most important point in the chart, in your natal chart. And the more I practice, the more I see it. Pay attention to my warnings about the North Node, though. Chiron, certain types of terminology are just so annoying. Wounded healer, and, these kind of manifestation, law of attraction. Now they start to be said, and you can almost sort of feel yourself getting ready to gag, because we're so kind of exhausted by all this kind of stuff. But it is, with Chiron, you're really healing your integrity. You're really coming back to who you were in your, I'm going to use another term that's going to make us all gag, inner child state, when it was uncorrupted, when fear was not necessary, when you were not wounded or shamed or driven off path as a child. It goes back that far. Now, when Chiron transits a certain part of the house, part of the chart, listen, if you're dealing with a Chiron square Chiron transit, or Chiron opposing Chiron, or if you're heading towards the age of 50 and you're dealing with a Chiron return, especially the Chiron return. The Chiron return at the age of 50 is the last maturing aspect that we have to deal with. Between the ages of 38 to 44, the pendulum swings with urgency towards following our north node. We have Uranus opposing Uranus and Neptune squaring Neptune. A lot of astrologers who studied the midlife years will talk about this. And Barbara Henklau's book, I can't remember the name of it, Astrology and Kundalini or something like that, sort of goes into it. Now, there are certain things about that, this is true for anything I read, that I really love, enjoy, and respect, and other things that I listen to, but take with a grain of salt, I experiment with, but irrespective. As you head towards the age of 50, you're waiting for that that is how long it takes astrologically to reach some kind of self-awareness and maturity, and you're waiting for that Chiron return. Now, if you're dealing with something like that, this is a much more meaningful, Chiron's healing becomes enormously more important. But when Chiron is transiting through a chart, what it is really trying to do is it is trying to restore you to a whole, W-H-O-L-E state, to a place of your own integrity with the matters related to that part of the chart. And by that I mean being true to yourself, healing what is broken, what the wounds are, what renders you, what has separated you from yourself. And very often Chiron has no choice in order to do that except to re-expose you to certain stimuli, so that, and this becomes easier the older we get, so that we are more conscious about what we're going through and can more consciously attempt and try to heal ourselves. Which is why the Chiron return around the age of 50 becomes so important, because we should ideally, hopefully, have some resources, our own inner resources, our spiritual resources, that allow us to go, oh wow, I'm entering the same room again. I feel the same things that I have felt before related to these matters, but I can also tell that in dealing with what I'm going to deal with, I'm going to turn into a different person. A different person will exist in this room as a result of this healing. And the reason for Chiron to re-expose you to those wounds is unless you can actually see, it's a little bit like having a mosquito bite. You have it, but isn't it so interesting how, have you ever noticed how your body informs you when something is wrong and you haven't felt it? It could be a scratch, it could be an insect bite. All of a sudden, your hand goes somewhere and you feel it, and before you have really felt it, that innate intelligence has said, you need to look here. Something's not right. Once you see it, you can do something about it. And with woundedness, you need to see it, feel it, and be motivated to do something about it. Now, when the North Node, our sense of calling, our sense of the carrot at the end of the stick, as I like to call it, and the wounded healer move up, get together, and this transit is occurring over the next, encoded into this next month, it only compounds my sense of urgency and importance to consider what is going on in the Aquarius part of your chart with this new moon. Now, the conjunction is happening in the sign of Aries. The house occupied by Aries in your chart is where the North Node Chiron conjunction is going to be most impactful. But the fact that it is encoded into this new means, again, there's something about this new moon in Aquarius and the actions that need to be taken in the sign of Aquarius through March the 22nd, but especially over the next 10 odd days, technically till March the 10th. But as I said, over the next 10 hours, because the energy is just so much cleaner. If you take action over the next, it's a little bit like planting seeds again. If you take action, you will find that you are reaping the results and continuing to take resulting and more actions as you head into March and towards March 22nd. And please don't forget that we have on February 22nd that Venus-Mars conjunction. And in a day or two, I'm going to start to consider Venus and Mars conjunct, because they're not quite 5 degrees away from each other, but in a day or two, they're going to be. And that is a very, talk about planting seeds. It's a great time to plant seeds, so to speak, in the Aquarius part of the chart. And before they're conjunct, they're both going to conjunct Pluto, and we'll come to that in a second. So in our sense of calling and our sense of healing something in the Aries part of the chart are getting ready to meet, it just gives this new moon and this lunar month that much more meaning, that much more importance. As I've said, there's something about the months of January and February, since January the 10th, even more after January the 25th, even more after this new moon on February the 9th. Technically, keeping going till about March the 25th or so, before Mercury goes retrograde on April the 1st. That is forward movement. The reason why I keep emphasizing the next 10 days is because, as I've said to you repeatedly, by the time the planets start to move into the sign of Pisces, the Pisces part of the chart will do two things. One, continue to manifest results related to whatever we've been planting in the Capricorn and Aquarius part of the chart, depending on which houses are occupied and what their relationship is with each other. But also, as planets move into Pisces and they conjunct Saturn, there's going to be a greater sense of responsibility and a greater sense of reckoning with what we have to contend with. It's a little bit like you've planted the seeds, the shoots are coming out of the ground, and now you've got to protect those shoots from everything that you need to protect shoots from. The proverbial, and I'm using this as an example, please do not go about hurting any beasties, the deer and the parasites and it's just like everything that could potentially, you've got to then nurture this 2024 growth that you've been planting in January and over the next 10 days in February. After that, it's not that action in the Aquarius part of the chart dies out. It continues. But anyway, so Mercury square Pluto, North Node Chiron conjunction, encoded into this new moon. It's almost as if by taking the actions that you could over the next 10 days, you are rejuvenating. It's a bigger sense of rejuvenation. It's almost like I get to do this again now, and I know so much more. I get to take these actions over the next 10, 11 days, some of which I may have taken before, but there's something more lasting I'm trying to create. I'm trying to create, especially with Pluto having entered Aquarius on January 20th, 21st. I'm trying to create something in the sign of Aquarius that's going to last another 19 years, that's going to be long-lasting, that's going to be building a foundation. It has that kind of feeling to it. I want to do it right. I want to be careful. I want to take the action, but I am so much more informed, so much wiser. And with the North Node Chiron conjunction, so much more open to the ways in which I sabotage myself and factoring them into the equation. Because when you follow the North Node in a grounded manner, you are doing the opposite of sabotaging. You are not sabotaging yourself at all. You're following the path that has a certain amount of magic and purpose and destiny associated with it. What's hard about the North Node is that the yearning is there and it feels right, but it's hard to do because we're not developed in that part of the chart. We feel the sense of calling because we're trying to develop those. That's where we're trying to grow. And with the conjunction with Chiron, bringing an awareness of what we're trying to heal will hopefully make us more conscious and aware of the South Node whirlpool we keep getting sucked back into that then sabotages us. Point number 5. So point number 1, I addressed the void of course moon and whether this new moon was void of course or not. I talked about the growing crescent. I talked about Mercury taking the lead. I've talked about the North-Node and Chiron conjuncting, which was the primary purpose of doing this video because I did not include that content in my last video on the new moon in Aquarius. Final point. The third transit that is encoded into this new moon is Mars conjuncting Pluto. Mars conjuncts Pluto on the 13th, 3 days from now. Venus conjuncts Pluto shortly after that on the 17th. If we think about what we're doing in the sign of Aquarius as building for the next 19 years, and we're taking actions in the short term that allow Jupiter and Uranus and the South Node to perform their functions, Jupiter and Uranus in Taurus, in the Taurus part of your chart, the South Node in the Libra part of the chart, releasing something in the Libra part of the chart. I've covered this in greater detail in the last video. That's all I'm going to say on this. Then, because these conjunctions to Pluto are happening as the planets are entering, the Sun is already conjuncted Pluto in Capricorn. I've covered that in the Sun-Pluto conjunction video I did around the 20th. Please look at that. That conjunction did not happen in Aquarius, but Mercury did conjunct Pluto in Aquarius on February the 5th. The next planet to conjunct Pluto is Mars on the 13th, Venus on the 17th. With Mars conjunct Pluto, if you're going to build something somewhere, it's the energy of doing, but the doing includes what needs to be raised to the ground in order to build what needs to be built up, and the building as well. I was going to say it's the energy of planning, but planning is much more a Mercury and Sun task. We already know what needs to be done. We need to do it, but some part of the doing. The Mars-Pluto conjunction on the more challenging side in the Aquarius part of the chart could bring external conflict and attacks. Has to be said. The ultimate purpose of this, however, is for you to become alert to what is our contribution to this attack, and therefore what behaviors do we need to transform permanently and become conscious of as part of this Pluto transformation of the next 19 years. What are we doing that is not serving us and that makes us open to other people's, other situations, enmity, their frustration, their vindictiveness, their power plays? Mars conjunct Pluto may also ask you to think about, where do you have to draw the line? Where do you have to self-advocate? Where do you have to fight back? Where do you have to say, okay, you know what? Now, I am not advocating that anybody do any, I'm not advocating any yelling, screaming, physical, but none of that. I think we know sometimes what it is that we need to do in order to speak up for ourselves. Or to really look at, if you need to get the right type of professional help, whether it's law enforcement, whether it is whatever, whether it is lawyers, whatever, you know, just use your own best judgment, use your own counsel, see what it is that you have access to resources-wise, etc. But with the Mars-Pluto conjunction, we cannot ignore its potential for conflict. And it's already in the air. We're just 3 days away. But with the Mars-Pluto conjunction, always ask yourself. We need to ask ourselves, what do I need to transform in myself? It's not about whether I was right or wrong. To not make myself a target for this? And what do I need to do to defend my boundaries? In a more constructive sense, and Mars conjunct Pluto with Mars involved, Mars is a planet of desire. If someone says to me, what is Mars about to you? I would say desire. It's a red planet, testosterone. How do I go after what I want? When Mars becomes problematic and malefic, and things become violent, competitive, rapacious, lascivious, libido heavy, it's because of desire and an obstruction to it. And we really have to watch who we are at that point in time, because we may do something that is potentially harmful to ourselves, to others, problematic. Desire has its great motivating factor, but it can also, this is where Mars' counterpart, Venus, needs to be brought into the equation to balance things out and to make things more harmonious. Venus's great gift of a loving, bountiful energy. With Venus, of course, a challenged Venus or an overemphasized Venus can mean too much passivity, letting people walk all over us, not having enough boundaries, not desiring, just letting time go by. So with Mars conjuncting Pluto, on the one hand, if you're dealing with conflict, do not forget to look at the Pluto side of this and see in the Aquarius part of the chart, the house occupied by Aquarius, what you need to transform. So because Pluto will try and transform you in this part of the chart over the next 19 years. And the sooner you can see what it is that is creating a challenge or a problem, power play by others, are you being controlled by others? Are you in control of your own life? Is something else in control of your life? And Pluto will try to bring that external control to a halt. But again, just as Chiron, in order to heal, makes you feel the wound, with Pluto, you're going to be made to come face to face with what or who you are allowing to control you. And when we've got Mars involved, we've got to, A, examine what we have done to contribute to the situation. It's not about right or wrong. It's about, could we have, if a bee comes into the room and we're allergic, there are things that we can do to try and get out of its way so that we don't hurt ourselves. Now, what are the actions that we can do when you're walking down the street and someone seems to be inebriated or violent? Are you going to go confront them, or are you going to, so it's not about right or wrong. It's about what is it about our personality that has contributed to this aggression? And number two, do we need to set boundaries? On a non-relationship side, when it comes to actually constructing something in the Aquarius part of the chart and what that is, Mars conjunct Pluto gives us a tremendous amount of energy. It says, all right, the Sun and Mercury have drawn out the plans and now we get to execute. And we get to build the edifice that is right for us, that is productive for us, that we're building over the next 19 years. We covered this with the energy of all the other transits related to this new moon. It gives us, you may find, even though the moon is at a crescent, luckily Mars conjunct Pluto and Mars entering Aquarius may give you the vim, the get your butt in the driving seat and start driving and plant those seeds. It might give you that even though the moon is small at this point in time, and we need that. And Mars conjunct Pluto may, even over the next 2 or 3 days, you might feel like, you know what? Amazing while the moon is small what it is that I've done and achieved. It's given me the ability to execute, to go after what I want, while being mindful, because it's Mars, of being aware of who might be getting in the way of that, either unintentionally because they're going after what they want, or because what I want may not be completely in alignment with them and we need to have a conversation. We've got Mercury in Aquarius helping us out, and we've got Venus following very close behind. The other thing with Mars conjunct Pluto that you have to pay attention to is what needs to go away. If I am going to plant this garden, if I am going to build this edifice in the Aquarius part of the chart, is there old construction that needs to be demolished? Are there old foundations that need to be removed? Does this garden need to be de-weeded, unweeded, whatever it is? What needs to be cleared? It's going to be part of the equation. The great blessing, of course, is that a few days after the Mars-Pluto conjunction, we have Venus and Pluto conjuncting. And for all intents and purposes, Venus should be within a 5-degree separation from Pluto, even as Mars is conjuncting it. And so we do have access to the right tone. So that even if right now we feel in some part of, if we feel a little bit under attack, just take that deep breath, and as you get ready to determine where you're going to assert boundaries, know that you can assert the boundary, and know that you might be able to do it, glory be, in a harmonious way that seeks mutual benefit to the best of our ability, and tries to find a, you know how sometimes if people are trying to do something against someone else, they'll keep going because they think that they can get away with it, especially if they're doing something behind people's back, etc., and the other person doesn't know it, they feel into it, but you can't manage something that is not in front of you. And if they think that someone is either soft or not going to do something about it or has kind of left the building, they'll continue to take that ground as best they can. Mars conjunct Pluto allows you to say, hold on a second, not so fast, you're not going to. Followed by Venus conjunct Pluto that allows you to say, in a particular way, in a sweet way, this is really not going to happen. Is there a way we can find some sort of a solution? But these are my stakes in the ground. And it allows a resolution to occur in a kind of diplomatic, handshakey way. There's the potential for something to not escalate and to be managed. Venus conjunct Pluto also means that as we get to the Venus conjunct Pluto date on February the 17th, results may start to show up. Relationship, financial. We may go from what needs to be destroyed, what needs to be restored, and action being taken to here. Let the universe also supply you with openings and opportunity. Let's talk about how finances and relationships and bounty related to the Aquarius part of the chart can also undergo transformation. And I'm saying these things as they're so light, finances and relationships. And when it's a conjunction to Pluto, it's the relationship aspect. If Mars brings the conflict side of things up to the surface, Venus brings what can my best self look like? That who do I need to be to have harmonious relationships in this part of the chart? And as I've said to you before, the quality of our abundance is dependent on the quality of our relationships. That is a Venusian statement. The only thing with this Mars-Venus conjunction to watch out for is that if Mars-Pluto and Venus-Pluto conjunctions to watch out for is if Mars-Pluto signifies some sort of enmity attack, you want to make sure that you're getting in front of it so the Venus-Pluto conjunction doesn't mean that your relationships or your finances are somehow being affected by it. You do have the means, if you need to draw the line where you need to draw the line. Ultimately, whether you're having to draw the line and harness Mars's boundary setting and Venus's courtliness to defend and love and protect yourself in a particular situation, you have that ability. But whether you're dealing with a conflict or whether you're dealing with constructing something that is really going to last in the Aquarius part of the chart, and you're likely going to be doing a mixture of both with these conjunctions. The ultimate question is, who have you been in the Aquarius part of the chart until now? And how does that get transformed for your highest good with Pluto's transit over the next 19 years in this part of the chart? If I were to bring this all back to the new moon in Aquarius, ultimately what is still most important and the lens we have to look at is, what actions do we need to take, particularly in the next 10 days? Even if we just call them seed planting, there might actually be more over the next week from a communication perspective that will allow Jupiter to end a 12-13 year cycle, start a 12-13 year cycle in the Taurus part of the chart, for Uranus to make us more individual and authentic in the Taurus part of the chart, and will allow us to release what we need to in the Libra part of the chart. And everything else I've said is in support of that. If you're dealing with conflict with these Pluto conjunctions, Mars and Venus, it is to make sure that whatever it is that you're trying to build in the Taurus part of the chart as a result of these Aquarian actions is not compromised. But ultimately, the new moon is not, the new moon cycle is another 28 days. The personal planet's transit is going to be done by March the 22nd. The reason why I'm bringing up the next 19 years and I'm talking about this edifice that needs to be constructed is we can't, somewhere, because the Mars-Pluto conjunction is encoded into this new moon, whatever it is that we're doing is serving whatever needs to be raised to the ground or de-weeded in the Aquarius part of the chart, and whatever edifice we're also building over the next 19 years. Because that's what these Pluto conjunctions and these transits are. The significance of the Sun and Pluto entering Aquarius when they did this year, even though Pluto has not entered Aquarius for good, is to make us aware, make us more conscious than we were last year, to make us more conscious about what our work in Aquarius is going to be over the next 19 years. What behaviors and patterns and things, frankly, are we attached to that have too much power over us for our own good? And as I said with Pluto, just know that, especially as you did, the number one priority with that, of course, is to finish up Pluto's transformation since 2008 in Capricorn by the end of the year. This has been a lengthy video, but I'm I'm feeling good about, sometimes when you feel called upon to do something and to, I really feel like to the best of my ability in this video and the last video, and prior to that, there was a whole sort of, you see what you need to, I feel like I've provided the best I can with regard to guidance around this new moon in Aquarius cycle. So if you found this useful, please tell your friends about the channel, of course, get the word out. That'll be helpful. Share the video, let people know where it is. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. My email address is in the description area, so if you're interested in getting a reading, you can email me there, and I can give you relevant information. But you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, and when you subscribe, there's a bell icon. Click on the wiggly bell on top when you hover over that bell, and you'll be notified when I do new videos. Thank you for your support, and thank you to the people who have been leaving comments and liking the videos and watching the videos and all that kind of stuff. Welcome to new subscribers as well. I am truly grateful for the time you take and the time you spend on this channel. Thank you.